Okay, so I have some prepared remarks, and I'll try to add on based on what some of the other questions and what some of the other speakers have said. So first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity to testify. My name is Baruch Feigenbaum. I am the Assistant Director of Transportation Policy at Reason Foundation, a nonprofit think tank, and I'm also the Senior Fellow with the Georgia Public Policy Foundation.
Oh.
So the report that the previous speaker referenced was actually
I didn't know
wrote.
that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. We'll take it all. For almost 4 decades, Reason's transportation experts have been advising federal, state, and local policymakers on transportation matters. I would say I'm a graduate of the Georgia Institute of Technology with a master's degree in transportation planning and coursework in engineering. Interestingly enough, my master's paper actually studied induced demand, which a previous speaker referenced. Some of the roadways expansions, if they're tolled roadways, actually don't lead to induced demand because you have the tolling, and that's actually what's been proposed on the Georgia 400 corridor, but we'll get to that in a minute. And with Reason, I have authored studies on mobility, highway congestion, transit options, etc. Let's see, most relevant, I served on 2 National Academy of Sciences Transportation Research Boards Committee, the Bus Transit Systems, which is part of the Public Transit Group with the National Academies of Science, and the Intelligent Transportation Systems. And so my testimony today is going to draw on all these. So we've heard quite a bit about Senate Bill 313. I would mention that the corridors that are being considered are each unique and somewhat different. The Clifton corridor from Brookhaven to Emory, if we are to look at rail, is the most promising line due to its high densities and commuting patterns. In fact, some would argue that that line might make more sense as a heavy rail line than a light rail line, which is what's being considered right now. The other line extending out to Lithonia needs further study, really, before we can say much of anything about it in terms of the best technology. But the red line to Alpharetta, with the combination of the high costs of rail expansion and the corridor's low population and employment densities, a bus rapid transit express bus hybrid line would actually be a better option. In terms of paying for transit, while a 0.5% countywide sales tax is the most likely funding options, I would argue it is not the best. From a policy perspective, there is no relationship between how much a person pays for a market basket of goods and how much transportation he or she uses. Increasing the sales tax for those on the right side of the aisle makes comprehensive tax reform in Georgia challenging. Increasing the sales tax for those on the left side of the aisle is very regressive. It harms the low-income riders who, in reality, depend on transit services the most in the region. The proposed new sales tax would be in effect for 40 years, and obviously there's going to be some technological development by that time. I would argue a better funding option would be to provide a small amount of funding from the general fund. Legislators can dedicate between $120 million and $200 million per year. Funds could be available based on the types of transit and paratransit service, with a 50% match for counties that provide existing service. And counties or cities would be free to use this for whatever type of transit services they want to. I would point out that there's actually local transit services in 103 of 159 counties. So I would argue this is probably not just a Metro Atlanta region issue. Let's talk about local roadway needs. I think many of the speakers have already referenced that many metro counties, certainly in North Fulton where I live, have significant local roadway needs. And due to previous tight budgets because of the Great Recession, numerous of roadways need to be expanded or rehabilitated. I'm sure some of you have noticed the pavement quality on some of the roads in Georgia has deteriorated over the last few years simply because GDOT did not have the money to maintain them. That's true for local roads as well. Census data shows that the Atlanta urbanized region, only 3.5% of workers commute to work using transit. In Georgia, that number is actually lower at 2.1%. And that number is lower still when you look at non-work patterns, leisure activities. So I think everyone in this room agrees that we need to improve the regional transit network, but it might be unrealistic to devote a 0.5-cent sales tax to transit and give nothing to local roadways. I want to talk a little bit about cost, ridership, and density. One of the justifications for rail transit lines that we often hear is that millennials will not move to neighborhoods without transit. But there's actually not been any peer-reviewed academic data to support this claim. What the data supports is that millennials will not move to neighborhoods without quality transit service. But the quality transit service does not necessarily have to be rail. We heard a lot about millennials buying cars, maybe because there's some pent-up demand. I would also point out that nationwide miles driven increased 3.6% between 2014 and 2015, And vehicle miles traveled set another all-time record in the Atlanta urbanized area for 2015. For the first 9 months of 2015, MARTA carried 3% fewer riders than the year before. Prior MARTA rail expansions have not met their ridership projections. The previous Red Line expansion from Dunwoody to North Springs carried only about 1/3 of the ridership it was forecasted to carry. Certain studied stations have struggled even more for certain stations, and of course you have to take development considerations and location into consideration, but for every 25 riders that were expected, or we told the federal government we're going to take our system when we actually asked for money, only one did in certain stations. Now, predicting rail transit ridership is very challenging. We're not ever going to get it perfectly right, but past projections have erred on the high side, particularly in Atlanta. Another justification we often hear for rail is that businesses will only locate on rail lines. Certainly some businesses like the proximity of transit. Others will choose lower rents in areas that don't have transit service. I would say many others, if you look at cities across the country with high quality bus service, would be more than satisfied with such service in Atlanta. And I would point out, I think there are some businesses that choose their location based on rail, and that's great. But we have an existing 50-mile rail system and a very much more realistic potential expansion to Emory, which is further along in the planning stages for those businesses that want to locate in those areas. There is no academic support that says rail lines draw business any more than bus lines do. You do need a quality transit network, that's absolutely true, but it's the quality of the network and not the actual mode that matters. Constructing heavy rail is expensive. The $209 million per mile cost estimate for the Red Line expansion is similar to the MARTA extension, the Dunwoody to North Springs one I discussed, which cost $201 million per mile 16 years ago. The high cost of rail can absolutely be justified in areas with a larger percentage of jobs located in downtown cores and high-density transit stations. Manhattan, for example, in New York City, where they are currently building the 2nd Avenue subway or finding the funds to do so, has a density substantially higher than Atlanta, and also has a high percentage of its jobs located in downtown. Whereas Metro Atlanta, where the rail line is designed to feed passengers, has less than 5% of Metro Atlanta's jobs. And in fact, the city of Atlanta as a whole has less than 10% of the region's population. Rail systems, which are hub and spoke, are designed to transport workers from suburban regions to downtown. But many Atlanta jobs are in the suburbs, and most workers, I should say the majority of workers, commute from suburb to suburb. Many residents of North Fulton commute to the Cumberland area in Cobb, or to North DeKalb, or to other job centers without rail service. So we have to realize that if we expand one particular rail line, that line is not going to address all of the people who are commuting. And as for density, as I mentioned, the MTA in New York is building the 2nd Avenue subway in an area with 70,000 people per square mile. The Washington Metro Area Transit Authority, which is building the Silver Line, some of you may know, out to Dulles Airport, is doing so in an area with 5,000 people per square mile. That is considered on the low end for heavy rail. The North Fulton Corridor, in contrast, has a population density of approximately 1,500 people per square mile, which is far too low to support rail, even if we see significant increases in density in the next few years. I would also point out that new transit technology is likely to revolutionize transit service over the next 30 years. I know the National Academy of Sciences is heavily looking at this. When all the committees, one of our tasks was actually to look at the role of technology in the future. Many millennials are substituting ride-sharing services such as Uber and Lyft for traditional fixed-route transit. They are no doubt doing the same for cars, but it's important to remember that they are not tied to a transit vehicle any more than they are tied to a car. Autonomous vehicles, which are still in the development stage, are likely to revolutionize transit service and land use, probably within 30 to 40 years. So while quality mass transit service is important today, we need to make sure we build a system that has the flexibility to evolve with technological developments. I would also point out that even if a 1/2 cent sales tax were approved, it would take a very long time to pay back the funds. In current year dollars, a 1/2 penny sales tax increase in Fulton County is estimated to raise approximately $100 million per year. Obviously this varies based on growth, but using today's numbers, which I feel are the only numbers I can confidently use, the cost of MARTA's heavy rail expansion from North Springs to Windward Parkway is estimated to cost at least $2.4 billion. There's been some remarks about the amount of money the federal government provides. Actually, under the Obama administration, and we think this is going to continue under future administrations, the federal government has provided less and less of a project's capital funds. The regions that actually get federal rail funding are regions that submit as much of their own funding as possible. For example, the Los Angeles region, which has been one of the most successful, does so because they only expect 20% of a match from the federal government. And assuming any more than 25% of a match from the federal funding is unrealistic in any rail transit project going forward. Certainly with this administration, I would argue for the next one as well. So assuming we have that, and assuming we're going to spend some of that 0.5 cent on the Emory line, and I would argue some other transit improvements that might be made, we're talking about an order of 50 years of sales tax revenue to pay off the Red Line Extension project, and that does not include the interest. A bus rapid transit or express bus line, and I would argue a network, would be a much better fit for the corridor. Unlike a new rail line, the running way for the buses can be funded with existing revenue. It does not take a new sales tax. We have the revenue raised as part of last year's transportation funding reform package. GDOT has plans to build 2 managed lanes in each direction on State Road 400 from I-285 to McFarland Road. These lanes will offer a new variably tolled travel option for drivers, as well as provide a semi-dedicated right-of-way for buses. There are also regions throughout the country, including Minneapolis, for example, that have built bus stations on these rail lines. I encourage you to take a look at that and see the cost-effective benefits that those lines have. And I would say best of all, these runways are already paid for. I would also say there's been some talk about the time it's going to take to build that line. It is going to take just as long, if not longer, to build a rail line, because we have to go through all of the environmental documents and all of the concerns there. We also have to find the money. And like I mentioned, if you've been following the Port of Savannah's quest for federal money, just because you put in an appropriation doesn't mean you get it. It takes a while to get that federal funding. Express bus and BRT are not your father's bus services. Express buses are comfortable coach buses featuring Wi-Fi and televisions. BRT buses, including many features that differentiate them from traditional local buses, including running way priority, unique station design, larger vehicles, electronic smart card collection, similar to what you see now with MARTA and the Breeze card, intelligent transportation systems, features such as signal prioritization and more frequent service. BRT stations also typically include land use changes that many of the proponents for enhanced rail service have argued are important, all in addition to elevated boarding and electronic signage. On Metro Atlanta surface streets, we would most likely use BRT lights, where buses share lanes with cars, although obviously in corridors with heavy bus service, you could certainly dedicate a lane where it's justified. So I would argue that North Fulton could have BRT connections to East Cobb, North DeKalb, Southwest Gwinnett, South Forsyth, and Southeast Cherokee counties, all places that are referenced where people live and or work and commute to North Fulton County. Rail is estimated to be, depending on the type of transit you use, between 15 and 20 times the cost of bus rapid transit, considering that many of the busway capital costs are already paid for because the roads already exist, which means that for one MARTA heavy rail expansion, we could provide 20 high-quality bus rapid transit expansions. I would also suggest that if we want to build a transit network for the entire region, we can build 3, perhaps, rail lines over the next 50 years, and that's going to require much more than a half a cent sales tax, or we can build a network of BRT and high-quality express bus lane system in less time and actually have it serve everybody, as opposed to just serving the folks who are fortunate enough to get the rail lines. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'd be happy to answer any and all questions.